In the far reaches of space there was a quiet world named Veritas where peaceful beings lived among silver forests and blue rivers, until one night when the sky tore open and fire rained down as ships of the Trion Dominion descended. They were a cruel race with cold eyes and voices that sounded like metal scraping stone. They wanted nothing but control, and they crushed every small world they found. The people of Veritas screamed as their cities burned. Their sky towers fell and their green plains turned to ash. Their leaders sent a desperate signal into the stars, a plea for anyone who could hear to come and save them. But no answer came, and the Viridians began to believe that no one would ever come. Far away on Earth, the same signal reached the deep space listening station buried under the mountains. A young technician named Oliver sat alone at his console when the strange sound arrived. It was faint, like a whisper under static. He listened closely, then called his commander, his heart beating fast. Commander Alex Grant arrived moments later, tall, calm, his eyes tired but sharp. He listened to the signal and said softly, "This is a call for help, not just noise." Oliver replayed it again and again, until the message became clear. The words were not human, but the meaning was pain and fear and hope. Grant carried the message to the Earth Council, who sat in their bright chamber high above the clouds. They looked down at the world they had rebuilt after so many wars. They were proud of peace and did not want to risk it. One of them said, "We cannot go across the stars for a people we do not know." Another said, "We have barely enough ships to protect our own colonies." But Grant spoke quietly, and his voice carried across the room. He said, "We used to be the ones who needed help, and no one came. If we turn away now, we will lose what makes us human." There was silence. Then a single nod from the council head, and the decision was made. Earth would send a small fleet, not for war but for rescue. The great ship Eagle's Resolve was chosen to lead the mission. Its metal hull old but strong. It had seen wars and carried the scars of battles long past. With it went two smaller ships for support, the Dawnlight and the Horizon. Commander Grant took command of the fleet. Beside him was Captain Laura Blake, a woman known for her quick mind and calm tone, and Sergeant Ethan Cole, a soldier with more courage than caution. He had seen the worst of war, but still believed in doing what was right. The people of Earth gathered in cities and watched the screens as the fleet prepared for launch. They saw the ships gleaming under the rising sun, and they whispered prayers, some for the brave ones going out there, some for the hope that this would not bring another war. Families stood together as the countdown began. Children waved flags and old veterans saluted, remembering the time when they too had gone into the unknown. As the engines roared, the ships rose from the launch platforms, fire trailing beneath them, and climbed higher through the atmosphere until they vanished into the dark sea of space. Inside the Eagle's Resolve, the crew worked silently, their faces showing a mix of fear and pride. Laura checked the navigation routes, making sure the jump would take them safely across the vast distance. Ethan sat with his squad, cleaning their armor, talking quietly about what kind of world they were going to. Grant walked the bridge, watching the stars outside. The window. He knew this mission would change everything for humanity. If they failed, Earth might never try again. If they succeeded, it could mean a new beginning. Days passed as the fleet crossed the void. The hum of the engines was the only sound, and the stars drifted by like slow-moving lanterns. One night, Ethan stood by a viewing port staring at the endless blackness and said to himself, "I wonder if they even know we are coming." Laura passed by and heard him. She smiled and said, "They will know when they see us." Grant stood at the center of the bridge, hearing their voices and thinking of the people on that far world. He remembered the words of an old soldier who once told him, "Courage is not about not being afraid. It is about doing what you must even when you are." As the ships neared Veritas, the scanners began to pick up signals, signs of battle wreckage drifting through space and faint energy bursts from the surface. Grant felt a chill and ordered the fleet to slow down. The view on the main screen showed a world covered in smoke glowing red from the fires of war. Laura studied the readings and said, "The enemy is still there. The Trions are occupying the main cities." Ethan's voice came through the intercom, "Ready to deploy when you are." Sir Grant nodded, his eyes firm. "Tell the troops to prepare." The fleet entered orbit above Veritas. The sight of the planet made everyone silent. The once bright oceans now looked dark and broken. The transmission channels came alive, with frightened alien voices begging for help. When the Viridians saw the human ships, they thought it was another wave of invaders. They did not yet know who had come. Grant sent a calm message to the surface saying, "We are from Earth. We are here. To help, we will not leave you alone." Down on the ground, the Viridians hid in caves, watching the sky as streaks of light appeared. The first human drop pods entered the atmosphere, the sound of their engines echoing like thunder across the valleys. Ethan and his team sat inside one of the pods, their hearts pounding as they felt the heat around them. The pod shook violently, then hit the ground with a heavy crash. The doors opened, and the soldiers stepped out into a world of ruins. Fire and smoke surrounded them. The air was thick and hard to breathe, but they moved forward, weapons ready. The first thing they saw were the Trions, tall, armored creatures with blades growing from their arms. Their eyes glowed like red fire. They turned when they saw the humans and laughed, thinking these small creatures could do nothing. But Ethan and his squad moved fast, using cover and firing in short bursts. Their bullets hit the weak points of the armor. The Trions fell one by one, surprised by the precision and teamwork of the humans. The Viridians hiding nearby watched in silence. Then one of them whispered, "They came, they really came." Grant watched the feed from orbit and felt a weight lift from his chest. Laura guided air support to protect the landing zone, sending drones to clear enemy positions as more drop pods fell through the sky. The humans spread out, securing safe zones for the refugees every hour. They rescued more Viridians, carrying them to safe shelters where medics tended. To them, the aliens could not believe the humans were risking their lives for strangers. Night fell on Veritas, and the first human camp lit up under the stars. Ethan sat beside a small fire, cleaning his gear. Laura joined him, her face tired but calm. She said, "The council will be watching us every move we make." He nodded and said, "Then we better make it worth watching." Far above them in the orbiting ship, Grant stood alone on the bridge, looking down at the world below. He knew the battle had just begun, but he also knew something greater had started that night. Humanity had answered a call no one else had, and that would change everything. The night was quiet on the broken colony world, where the last few humans still lived under alien rule. The stars above were dim because the sky was filled with dust and smoke. From years of burning cities, the people of the colony had forgotten how blue the sky once looked, and how it felt to walk free without fear. Every sound in the night made them stop and listen, because they never knew when the alien patrols would come again to take someone away. They had been told long ago that Earth was gone, that no one was coming, and that they must obey or die, and for many years they believed it. But hope is a strange thing. It hides deep inside, even when all light seems lost, and tonight something moved in that dark sky that none of them expected to ever see again. A boy named Eli stood near the old beacon tower that had not worked for many years. He was thin and quiet, and spent most of his nights staring at the stars. His grandfather had told him stories of Earth and the great armies that once fought to protect humanity. But the aliens had come faster than anyone believed. They had ships that burned the sky and weapons that could turn cities into dust. Eli had grown up under their shadow, but he still dreamed of the stories he had heard. When he saw a faint light falling through the clouds, he thought for a moment it was another meteor. But then he saw it split into many smaller lights moving in perfect formation. Like wings of fire, he called out, and others ran to see the sky. The old beacon that had been silent for years began to blink weakly, as if trying to speak again. The people of the colony gathered outside their shelters, looking up in disbelief. The air trembled and the ground shook as something huge broke through the clouds. It was not an alien ship. The shape was different, more like the ones in the old stories, a human ship falling through the smoke with its engines burning, but still fighting to stay steady. When it landed in the far valley, a bright flash lit up the mountains, and a deep roar echoed through the empty land. The people stared for a long time, unsure if it was real, until the sky cleared, and they saw the mark of Earth painted on the side of the metal hull. Laura was the first one to reach the crash site. She was young but brave, and she had lost her parents to the alien raids many years ago. She carried a small rifle that barely worked, but she never left it behind. As she walked closer, she saw smoke rising and shapes moving. Inside the broken ship, she raised her rifle and shouted for whoever was there to show themselves. Then a voice answered through the smoke. It was human strong and tired and filled with something that sounded like purpose. A man stepped out wearing armor that was scratched and burned. His name was Ryan. He looked around and smiled faintly when he saw her. He said softly that he had finally found them. Laura lowered her weapon slowly as more soldiers climbed out of the wreck, their suits marked. With the blue insignia of Earth Defense Command, she could not believe her eyes. Ryan told her that Earth had survived and had built new fleets to find the lost colonies. He said that they had followed an old signal, one that had been sent from this planet years ago before the aliens blocked communication. The ship that brought them had been attacked by alien fighters and forced to crash, but they were alive and ready to fight. Laura led them to the colony, and the people there could hardly speak when they saw the humans from Earth. They cried and touched the armor as if to make sure it was real. That night, the colony that had been silent for years came alive again. Fires were lit and people shared food with the soldiers. Ryan spoke to the elders and learned what had happened since the fall. The aliens had built mines across the mountains and used the colonists as slaves to gather metal for their war machines. The humans who resisted were taken away and never seen again, but now with Earth soldiers among them, something changed inside the people. They began to stand taller, to speak louder, and to look at the sky, not with fear, but with hope. Ryan looked at them and said that they were not alone anymore, that Earth remembered its children. While the colony celebrated in whispers far away in the alien fortress, a signal was received. Their scanners had picked up the crash, and their commander knew that the humans had returned. He was tall and pale with dark eyes that seemed to glow. He looked at the message and ordered his generals to prepare the hunter ships. He said that the humans were like fire, small at first, but dangerous. If allowed to spread, he wanted the fire crushed before it could rise again. The alien army began to move across the desert, silent and fast, leaving behind trails of light in the sky. At dawn, Ryan and his team began to repair what was left of their ship. They had weapons and supplies, but they knew the aliens would not stay quiet for long. Laura helped them gather materials from the colony, and Eli watched in awe as they worked. He asked Ryan what Earth looked like, and Ryan smiled and said it was green and blue and full of life, and that one day he would see it himself. But first they had to protect this world because it was a piece of humanity that still breathed. Eli nodded and said he would fight too, even if all he had was a small tool instead of a gun. Later that day, the warning came. The outer scouts of the colony saw the alien ships descending from the north like shadows against the sun. Ryan gathered his soldiers and armed the colonists as best as he could. He told them to stay low and use the ruins for cover. The first blasts hit the edge of the valley, shaking the ground and sending dust into the air, but the humans did not run. They fired back with everything they had. The sound of battle filled the air, and for the first time in years, the aliens met. Resistance. Laura fought beside Ryan using her rifle to take down drones that flew overhead. She moved quickly through the rubble, helping the wounded and shouting orders. Ryan stood on a broken wall, directing fire and throwing grenades that lit up the sky. The aliens advanced in formation, their armor glowing faintly under the strange light, but the humans held their ground. The fight raged for hours until the aliens began to pull back, leaving behind wreckage and silence. Ryan stood among the smoke, breathing hard, and said they did it. They held the colony. When night came again, the stars looked brighter over the world that had once forgotten how to hope. The people buried their dead and built fires along the walls as a sign that they still lived. Ryan sat by the fire with Laura and Eli and told them that more ships were coming from Earth, that the fleet would soon arrive to free the other colonies. Laura asked if he really believed that, and he said yes, because if they had found them once, they would find others too, and together, they would make the aliens pay for every life they had taken. Far above the planet, in the dark space beyond the clouds, other ships were already approaching, silent and fast, following the same signal that had guided Ryan's ship. The battle for the colony was only the beginning, and soon the aliens would learn that humans never stopped fighting, even when everyone thought they were gone. And in the night, the stars watched quietly as the fires of Earth's warriors began to rise again. The colony stood quiet after the battle, but inside every person there was a fire that had not been there before. They had seen that the aliens could be stopped, and that gave them strength. They rebuilt walls from broken stone and metal plates from wrecked machines. They worked from sunrise to night with little rest, but with a new kind of purpose. Ryan helped them every day, his hands covered in dust as he lifted heavy beams beside the colonists. He had been a soldier all his life, but he had never seen such courage in people who had so little. Laura organized food and medicine with the others, walking from house to house to check on the wounded. She smiled even when she was tired, because she knew that smiles gave people hope. Eli carried tools and helped fix broken lights, his eyes shining every time someone said that maybe soon they could see the stars without fear. At night, the soldiers gathered with the colonists to tell stories around fires. Ryan spoke about Earth and how people there had not forgotten them. He said that the fleet was growing stronger and that soon help would come from Mars and the Moon, and even from stations that had been silent for decades. The people listened and believed him, because he spoke like someone who carried the truth. Laura looked at him as he talked and saw the weight in his eyes. She knew he carried more than courage. He carried the memory of all the soldiers who had fallen before reaching this place. One morning, Eli was climbing the watch tower when he saw movement in the hills. At first he thought it was smoke, but then he saw figures walking in a long line across the rocks. He ran down to tell Ryan, who ordered everyone to take cover. The figures came closer slowly until they reached the edge of the valley. And then Ryan saw they were not aliens, they were humans, thin and tired and covered in dust. They held sticks and old rifles and walked as if every step was pain. Their leader was a tall woman with dark hair tied back in a braid. She raised her hands and said they came in peace. Ryan lowered his weapon and walked toward her. She said her name was Mara, and that her people had been hiding in the caves for years. They had heard the explosions and seen the fire in the sky and thought maybe the old stories were true, that Earth had returned. Ryan smiled and said they had come back, and that this time they would not leave. The new arrivals were weak and hungry, but they carried stories of other small groups of humans still living in the wastelands. Mara told Laura that the aliens had built great machines in the mountains and were gathering energy for something. She did not know what it was, but she said it was unlike anything she had seen before. Ryan listened carefully and told her they needed to prepare for another attack. He believed the aliens would come again soon because they had been humiliated and would not let that stand. Laura gathered supplies and made new shelters, while Ryan and his men began to train the colonists to fight. They taught them how to move silently, how to aim, and how to survive a battle with few weapons. Eli watched and practiced every day until he could hit a target with his small rifle. Mara joined the training and proved herself a fierce fighter. Soon everyone respected her, and she became one of Ryan's closest allies, far away in the alien fortress. The commander, named Kale, stood before a map made of light. He watched the movement of his scouts and listened to reports from the officers. The humans had held the colony again, and his army had been forced to retreat. He felt anger burning inside him, and his pale eyes glowed as he ordered new weapons to be prepared. He wanted to crush them completely and erase the memory of their defiance. He told his generals that humans were dangerous because they believed in something he could not understand. Hope, he said, was a sickness, and it had to be burned from this world. He promised that when the sun rose again, the colony would be gone. That night, Ryan stood on top of the old beacon tower looking at the stars. The air was cold and still. Laura climbed up beside him and handed him a small piece of bread. She said he needed to eat. He smiled faintly and said he could not rest while waiting for the next fight. She said none of them could, but they had to believe that it was worth it. He looked at her and said, "It was worth it for every child who could grow up free." They stood together in silence, watching the sky above where faint lights blinked. Maybe ships, maybe just stars, but they hoped it was the fleet coming. At dawn, scouts came running from the outer hills, their faces pale. The aliens were moving in great numbers across the desert. Their machines were larger than before, and their ships filled the sky. Ryan called everyone to arms. The colonists took their places along the walls while the soldiers checked their weapons. Mara led a small team to the ridges with explosives to set traps for the advancing enemy. Eli carried messages between positions, too young to fight, but brave enough to help. The ground began to shake as the alien machines drew closer, their engines growling like thunder. The sky darkened from the smoke and dust rising. Ahead of them, the battle began with a sound that tore through the air. Beams of energy struck the outer defenses and explosions rolled through the valley. But the humans did not run. Ryan shouted orders and fired back, his voice strong above the chaos. Mara's traps exploded one after another, stopping the alien advance for a moment. Laura directed the medics as the wounded were carried back. Eli ran through fire and smoke, carrying more ammunition to the soldiers. The aliens came in waves, their armor shining under the flashes of light, but every time they advanced, the humans found a way to push them back. Ryan climbed a damaged machine and fired down until his rifle overheated. He leapt to the ground just as an explosion threw him aside, but he stood again, his face covered in ash, shouting for his people to hold. The fight went on through the day into the night until the sky was red with fire. When the last of the alien machines fell silent, there was only smoke and the sound of breathing. The humans had won again, though many were gone. Ryan walked through the ruins, calling out for survivors. Laura found him near the broken wall, his arm bleeding, but he smiled when he saw her. She said they had done it, and he nodded, saying they had, proved they could not be broken. Eli came running with burns on his hands, but still carrying his rifle. He said he was not afraid anymore, and Ryan laughed softly, saying that was what it meant to be human. Mara came with her fighters, carrying what supplies they could salvage, and told Ryan that scouts reported the aliens retreating to the mountains. That night the fires burned low, and the valley glowed faintly under the stars. The people sat together in silence, too tired to speak. Ryan sat by the fire writing a message to the fleet. Though he did not know if it would ever be sent, he wanted to tell Earth that they were still alive. Laura came and asked what he was writing. He said he was writing history because someday someone would need to know that humans did not give up. She said maybe the stars were listening. He said, maybe, and closed his notebook, far away in the alien fortress. Kale stood before his council. Furious, his generals spoke of heavy losses and broken machines. He silenced them with a gesture and walked to the great window beyond which the planet glowed dimly. He said the humans had become more than a nuisance. They had become a symbol, and symbols were dangerous. He ordered the awakening of the ancient. Weapons buried deep beneath the surface machines that had slept since the first wars. His advisors hesitated, saying the weapons could destroy half the planet. But Kale said he did not care. The humans would be erased, even if it meant the world itself would die in the valley. The humans did not know what was coming. They only knew that they had survived again and that they would keep fighting. Ryan looked around at the people who stood beside him. Soldiers, colonists, children, all of them bound together. By one thing, they refused to kneel. He raised his rifle to the sky and said quietly, "For Earth, and for every world that still remembers who we are." The others echoed his words softly, their voices rising into the night, as the stars watched silently over the battered world, waiting for the storm that would come. The morning came slow over the broken valley, and the smell of smoke still filled the air from the battle that had ended only a few hours before. The humans had won the ground, but lost many of their own, and the cost of it could be seen everywhere. Ryan stood near the edge of the burned ridge and looked down at what used to be the alien camp. The ground was black, and the wind carried the ashes away. He said nothing for a long time, just watched the light spread across the sand. Laura came beside him, holding a small metal pad with a list of the wounded and dead. She said softly that they needed more medicine and food, and that people were starting to lose strength. Ryan nodded without looking at her and said they would find a way, because they always did. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the scouts came back with news. They had seen alien ships moving again near the mountains, but not in the way they did before. They were not coming to fight, but seemed to be building something big and strange. Ryan called a meeting in the old warehouse that they used as their command room. The air inside was hot and heavy, with dust maps were spread across the floor, and every eye was on him. He said the aliens were building something powerful, and they did not have much time. Mara stood by the wall cleaning her rifle and said she had heard a low hum from the mountains at night, like a heartbeat under the ground. Laura said it must be an energy core, and Ryan said if that was true, then it was a weapon, and it would kill them all if they waited. That night, under the weak light of the two moons, Ryan sent out two small teams, one led by Mara and one by himself. They moved through the desert without sound, the sand cold under their boots. and the stars bright enough to light the path Eli wanted to go too. But Laura told him he had to stay behind to help the wounded, and he obeyed, though he did not like it. Ryan's team reached the edge of the alien line before sunrise. What they saw made them stop in silence. Huge black towers stood on the sand, each one pulsing with blue light like it was alive. Alien soldiers moved around them with machines that carried strange metal canisters. Ryan realized it was a power system, something that would feed energy to a main core that could destroy the valley in a single burst. Ryan told his team to fall back before they were seen. But a small alien patrol appeared behind them, and the chase began. Beams of light tore through the night, sand flying up with every blast. Mara's team came from the ridge to cover Ryan's group, their shots cutting down the enemy one by one. The sound echoed across the dunes. Ryan shouted for everyone to move faster when one of his soldiers was hit, and fell. Mara ran back for him even when Ryan yelled for her not to go. She reached the man and dragged him up, just as another beam struck the ground near her. She fell hard, and blood ran down her arm, but she still pulled him toward the others. They made it to the canyon where their transport was hidden. Ryan helped her inside before the ship rose into the sky, the engines roaring as more shots followed them into the dark. When they returned to the colony, people rushed to help the wounded. The children hid their faces from the sight, but Ryan told them not to fear because this was the price of freedom. Laura cleaned Mara's wound and said she was lucky to be alive. Mara smiled weakly and said, "Luck had nothing to do with it." Ryan stood in the corner of the medical tent watching the faces around him. He knew the people were tired, but there was something else in them too, something hard that refused to break. He said they had to strike soon before the weapon was ready. Laura said that would mean going straight into the mountains, and Ryan said that was the only way far away in the alien fortress. Cale watched the great engines come alive. The machines rose like towers of glass and metal, each one glowing from within as they gathered power. One of his officers said that if the charge continued, it would tear the planet apart, but Cale did not care. He said no. World mattered if his enemies survived. He looked at the hologram of the human colony and said that by the next sunset nothing would be left of it. He believed that humans were a danger that must be removed forever. He turned away as the sound of the awakening engines filled the chamber like thunder. That evening, Ryan called everyone together. He climbed onto a broken wall in the center of the colony so that all could see him. He said the aliens were building a weapon that could destroy every living thing on the planet, and that they only had one chance to stop it. He said he would go into the mountains with whoever was willing to fight, because if they did nothing the next morning, they would all die. The crowd was quiet for a long moment. Then Laura stepped forward and said she would go. And after her, Mara raised her hand and said the same, and soon everyone was shouting that they would go. Ryan looked at them and felt something rise in his chest, something he had not felt since the war on Earth. He said then they would make history together. The next morning, they began their march across the desert. The heat came early and the air shimmered like water. The humans moved in lines across the open plain carrying their weapons and what food they could find. Mara led the scouts far ahead, while Ryan and Laura guided the main group. Eli walked beside them carrying a heavy pack and trying to look brave, though the sweat ran down his face. Ryan smiled at him and said he was doing fine when night came. They stopped under the stars. The silence of the desert wrapped around them, and Ryan sat alone for a while looking up at the sky. He thought of the old Earth cities and the people who had fallen long ago. He promised himself he would not let their memory fade. After 3 days, they reached the foot of the mountains, dark and sharp against the horizon. From there, they could see the alien fortress glowing faintly like a black sun. Ryan called his leaders together around a small fire and gave his plan. Mara would take a group through the eastern pass to plant charges under the main reactor, while he and Laura would lead the main assault to draw the enemy away. He said they would have to move fast before Cale realized what they were doing. The people listened in silence and nodded. They knew the risk, but they did not fear it anymore. As they prepared for the attack, the air above them began to flicker, strange lights moving through the clouds. At first they thought it was lightning, but then Ryan heard a deep, familiar sound, like thunder mixed with engines. He looked up and saw bright streaks cutting across the sky. They were ships breaking through the atmosphere. Ships of Earth. The humans stopped and stared as dozens of vessels descended like falling stars. Their engines lighting up the night. Laura grabbed Ryan's hand and whispered that they had come. He smiled for the first time in many days and said that they were not alone anymore. The ships came lower, and the sound grew so strong that the mountains shook and the sand lifted under their feet. The sky burned with light and hope rose in every heart for the first time since the war began. The people watched as one of the great ships slowed and opened its side hatches. Soldiers in armor stepped out, falling through the air with fire behind them. They landed near the human camp, and their voices came through the comms saying that Earth had heard their call and sent every fighter they had left. Ryan stood still for a moment, too moved to speak. Then he turned to his people and said that the final battle had begun and that this time they would fight not just to survive, but to take back the sky itself. The sky was full of fire and light as the ships of Earth came down from the clouds, their engines roaring across the desert, and their bright trails cutting through the smoke from the battle below. The colonists watched in silence, some falling to their knees, others shouting with joy and disbelief. Ryan stood among them with his eyes wide open and his chest rising fast. He had dreamed of this moment but never thought it would come. Laura stood beside him, her hand tight on his arm, and she said softly, "They came." Ryan said yes, they came because they never leave their own behind. The ships landed beyond the dunes, the ground shaking as they touched down, and waves of dust rolled through the valley. The ramps opened and soldiers in dark armor stepped out, their weapons glowing faintly under the rising sun. They carried the mark of Earth on their shoulders. Ryan ran to meet them with Laura and Mara at his side. When the leader of the soldiers took off his helmet, Ryan saw a man with gray eyes and a scar running across his jaw. He introduced himself as Captain Holt and said they had come from the last surviving fleet above Mars. Holt said they had followed the distress beacon from the colony, and when they saw the alien energy spike, they knew there was still a fight left to finish. Ryan shook his hand and said they had been fighting alone for too long. Holt nodded and said not anymore, because now the whole of Earth stood behind them. Laura asked how many ships had come, and Holt said enough to end this. Once and for all, he looked at the mountains and said that the enemy was strong but not invincible, and that they would burn their fortress to the ground together. As night came, the valley filled with the hum of engines and voices, people working side by side, humans from Earth and colonists alike, setting up defense lines, moving supplies, and preparing weapons. Laura directed the medical tents while Mara led a small team to scout the mountain passes. Ryan stayed, with Holt studying maps drawn into the sand showing where the alien reactor lay deep beneath the fortress. Holt said they would attack at dawn with air support from the fleet and ground forces striking from two sides. Ryan agreed, and said they would give everything they had left because this would be their last battle. When darkness settled, the camp grew quiet, though no one truly slept. The stars were bright, and the air still smelled of dust and fire. Ryan walked among the people and stopped beside Mara, who sat by a small fire cleaning her rifle. She looked up and said she could not believe that after everything they had been through, it would all come down to one more fight. Ryan said it was always one more fight, and that the last one was always the hardest. Mara smiled faintly and said, "Maybe after this there would be no more wars." Ryan said that would be worth dying for. Laura came to them carrying a small datapad with the last supply check. She sat between them and said everyone was ready and that they were not afraid anymore. Ryan looked at her and said they had reason to be brave because Earth had come back for them. Laura nodded and said that it felt like hope had returned. Ryan said it never really left, it only waited for the right moment to rise again. When the first light touched the mountains, the soldiers began to move the fleet above the clouds, opened its wings, and the sky filled with the glow of engines. Captain Holt gave the order, and the first wave of ships roared toward the alien fortress. The ground trembled with each explosion as their weapons struck the towers. Ryan and his team advanced behind the airstrike, firing into the smoke and fire. Laura stayed close, helping the wounded and shouting orders through the comms. Mara and her scouts slipped through the eastern pass under the cover of the chaos, heading straight for the reactor tunnels. Inside the alien fortress, Kale stood before the control core, his eyes reflecting the glow of the energy pulsing around him. His soldiers shouted reports of human ships breaking through their lines, but he did not listen. He believed the power of the reactor would soon be complete, and that the energy it released would burn everything on the planet. He raised his arms and ordered his guards to hold the fortress no matter the cost, because he would rather see it destroyed than lost to humans. Outside, the sky was filled with light and fire. Earth ships circled like hawks, their beams cutting. Through the alien defenses, Ryan's troops pressed forward step by step. Even as the heat from explosions washed over them, Ryan saw Captain Holt ahead, calling in coordinates for another strike, and he joined him. They moved together through the chaos until they reached the main gates. Holt told Ryan to push inside while he covered them. Ryan nodded and led his team into the fortress. The halls were dark and hot, the walls humming with strange energy, every step bringing them closer to the reactor chamber. Mara and her scouts reached the tunnels first. They crawled through the narrow passageways while dust and debris rained from the ceiling above them. The noise from the battle was like thunder. Mara told her team to set the charges. Around the reactor's support rings, the huge glowing core pulsed in the center like a beating heart. When she armed the last detonator, the ground began to shake even harder, and she heard the aliens closing in through the tunnels. She told her team to hold them off while she finished the sequence. They fought in the flickering light of the reactor, until only a few of them were left. Mara sent a final message through the comms saying the charges were armed and ready. Then static filled. The line. Ryan and Laura fought their way to the upper levels of the fortress, where Kale stood on a high platform overlooking the chaos. When Kale saw Ryan, he turned with fury and shouted that humans did not know when to die. He said they were a mistake that should have been erased long ago. Ryan raised his weapon and said, "Maybe, but mistakes learn." Kale attacked first, his strength powered by the energy running through the floor. Ryan barely blocked the blow, and the two of them clashed again. And again, sparks flying as metal struck metal. Laura tried to reach Ryan, but alien guards blocked her way. She fired through them one by one, calling his name. Kale knocked Ryan to the ground and raised his blade to strike, but before he could bring it down, Laura fired from below, hitting Kale in the side. He turned with a snarl, and Ryan used the moment to grab a broken pipe from the floor and drive it into Kale's chest. Kale stumbled backward, light pouring from his armor before he fell into the core below. The explosion of energy threw Ryan across the floor. He shouted for everyone to fall back, but the fortress was already collapsing. Mara's voice came through the comms saying the timers were at 0, and then silence. A moment later, the mountain erupted with light. The reactor exploded and the fortress came apart in a wave of fire that lit the entire valley. The shockwave knocked down ships and sent walls of dust rolling across the plains. When it was over, there was nothing left but smoke and the faint echo of thunder. Hours later, Ryan woke under a gray sky. The air quiet and still. Laura knelt beside him, her face streaked with dust but smiling. She helped him sit up. Around them lay wreckage and silence. Captain Holt came limping toward them, saying the aliens were gone. The fortress destroyed the survivors of the colony, and the fleet gathered together in the ruins, some cheering, others weeping. Ryan looked around for Mara, but she was nowhere to be seen. He closed his eyes and whispered her name. Later that day, they buried the fallen at the foot of the mountain. The wind carried the smell of burned stone and metal. Ryan stood at the front of the line of graves and said that every one of them had saved more than a world they had saved. A future. Laura stood beside him holding the small metal tags of those who were gone, and said quietly that maybe now the war was over. Ryan said wars never really end, but people can choose to live better. Captain Holt said he would send word back to Earth that the colony was free, and that humanity still stood strong. When night came, the fires burned not in fear, but in peace. People sat together under the stars, talking in quiet voices. The air was cool and still. Ryan looked up at the sky and saw the ships of Earth shining like small lights among the stars. He said softly that they would go farther someday, not to fight, but to explore. Laura smiled and said, "Maybe they already began tonight." Ryan nodded and said yes, maybe they did. As the wind moved over the valley, carrying the scent of new beginnings, the people of Earth stood together on a world that was no longer just a colony, it was home.